Hello, good afternoon. I'm Anto Budiarjo, and welcome to Monday Live. This is something we do every Monday afternoon at 3 to help us get through the pandemic and figure out what's on the other side. So profiles are on mondaylive.org. Views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post your comments and questions on the Zoom tools, the chat and the Q&A, and complete the survey at the end. This deck is available on mondaylive.org. Let me just go through them. This is our agenda today. We'll have a normal chit chat about what's going on. And then the main part, we're going to talk about sort of new ways of working, selling, playing, whatever. So each of us will have a different perspective on that. Hopefully to get your participation from the audience. Ken Sinclair is not able to join us. He's just provided us some links here and talking about December issue now. It's relentless with Ken. He's always thinking about the next month, but there you go. I'm glad that he's around. Requesting innovation is his next month's theme. Mark talking about gondola cars. I'm sure he'll elaborate in a minute, and also the numbers that don't look great from New York. John Petsey talking about a few interesting things. I'm sure we'll come back to this. I am thinking about new ways of travel, and I'll talk about that in the main part, because I think that's going to change. Anno talking about a whole bunch of stuff, which I'll give him an opportunity to comment on in a minute, and Roger talking about office and work life after COVID, our topic of today. So with that, I am going to put us back on, and who wants to start? How about?
I'll jump in if you want.
Go ahead, Anno.
Can you bring up that slide again? It had some interesting metrics.
Yep.
A couple of interesting comments. This actually came out of a Cushman Wakefield article that they published just this week, I think. Interesting article. They talk about the history and future of the office. And over on the left-hand side, if you get hold of it, it's kind of an interesting read. They talk about, the first half of the article talks about the history of why the office. Mm-hmm. And why it was originally created, and then they did the rest of the article is more about what they see as the dynamics of the future of office. There was an interesting, I thought this was kind of compelling. There was an interesting quote in there that they mentioned from Charles Lamb, right, who's the 19th century essayist, and he had a quote which they tried to put in context of, this is similar to what we do today. And his quote was, on Friday, it was a diary entry. And he said, on Friday, I was at office from 10 in the morning to 11 at night, and last night till 9. So, it was like how long he was talking about. But one of the interesting things he mentions that they picked up he talks about it as I was at office. And the term the office didn't really come about until much later. The term office was to be at work, to do work. Mm-hmm. And when you were at office, you were working, especially if you're intellectual, if you're doing like an essayist or something like that, right? And so the term, which you guys may or may not know, this has an interesting parallel with the US, right? The term the United States didn't come about till much later. The original term was United States. And it wasn't until, I can't remember, Lincoln or so, that the term the United States came about. Anyway, but back to that slide, a couple other interesting metrics, kind of shows you around the world which sort of industries could be conducted from home, oddly a lowish number for the US. And then down the bottom, an interesting number that during the COVID, 60% of US economic output was dependent on working from home. Wow. So imagine if we didn't have the tools and the capabilities today, what sort of situation we'd be in, not being able, when 60% of our economic output was dependent on people being able to do that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting stuff.
I guess
So-
with all the Ohio State, the trend continues, huh?
You stole my line there. Yes.
Yeah.
And if you noticed on that thing, a lot of those, when they do the NFL player, things, where they went to, many of them are doing the Syracuse University or the University of Virginia or whatever. So.
So Mark Zuckerberg should bring back the Facebook.
Yeah.
There you go, right? He should.
As soon as he gets a good imitator, he probably will.
Mark, you were talking about the gondola cars in New York.
Yeah, and again, I kind of chose this one, not gondola cars in New York, but they're two separate. They're two separate. But anyway, kind of goes with today's discussion. New ways. And what I found interesting is that Telluride is converting gondola cars into dining cabins for the winter. So imagine the indoor gondola cars in front of restaurants where they've added lights, heating, ambiance, or whatever. And that's where the restaurants are looking to change the dining experience, I guess, during this time, which I thought was kind of pretty clever, actually, to keep with skiing theme, whole Telluride ambiance. So I thought that was pretty good. And this other one was kind of disheartening, to be honest with you. It's the Partnership for New York City recently did a survey. And let me just kind of read this. 10% of the Manhattan office employees have returned to the office workplace as of the end of October. Only 10%. 15% of the Manhattan office employees are expected to return by the end of this year. And this last one is 27% of the employers say they don't know when employees will be back in the office. So bottom line here is I think it's unknown. And even though I think we collectively as an industry and as a global group trying to overcome this and deal with it, is in our world, while we've made some progress, we're still embracing the whole not in the office, work remote type things. So there you go.
Here in Europe, we've actually been told we should be working back at home. So I'm assuming that may come back to the US with your potential change, let's say, of a president. But I mean, I think there's a lot more thoughts on the numbers there now, and whether that 15% will actually be realized in Manhattan or it will stay that way. I don't know. Because the number's getting pretty high there now. Just on the slide I did there, Anto, I think McKinsey have done a really good report on reimagining the office and work after COVID-19. They're kind of saying, okay, you've got kind of 4 areas you need to think about is one, reconstructing how work is done. How would you do brainstorming? How would you have meetings? How will collaboration happen? And things like that. Then you're going to have to decide, is it people coming into work or the office or the office to people, thinking about how that's going to work for the future, and then kind of redesigning the workplace to support organization priorities. What are your priorities, and laying out the office for that? Will it be more distributed, as it's suggesting, in resizing the footprint by saying, hey, it's going to perhaps say you might have a smaller HQ, you might have more remote offices and so on. So it's saying you need to think through how you're going to be working in the future. The bottom one there with distributed manufacturing is perhaps a slightly older article, but it was talking about, due to COVID, what's actually happened in manufacturing is how the supply chains have got broken, and suddenly there's shortages because everything went kind of centralized manufacturing in Asia. And now people are thinking back about going through distributed manufacturing, especially with, the ability for peer-to-peer networks, as well as, supply chains being able to be done much more globally rather than just in one location. So a couple of indications there of how things may change, which could be part of the conversation later.
Yeah. John, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. So, I almost changed my background because I almost might have seen a little break in the clouds here with the announcement that the vaccine's doing so well with Pfizer and stuff. But I had already found the Energy Vision 2030. That's not that far off, right? You talk about things in 2040 and 50, but that's an interesting link to what seems to be realistic plans to improve energy efficiency, greenhouse gas, overall sustainability. And that's why I wanted to share that. I've detected there is, while we're seeing all of these, difficult impacts on business, I think I'm seeing evidence that there is increasing corporate interest and commitment to ESG principles, right? Environmental sustainability governance. The next one, really interesting article, save $4 billion in energy costs without any renovations. Use data to identify stuff not working right. It's an interesting idea. Maybe somebody will start a business to do something. Then again. And finally, while we don't look to be at all political, this organization, the American Council on Energy Efficiency Economy, which I've never detected to be politically biased anyway. A lot of interesting stories on there. One of them, of course, the headline is that they see a Biden presidency will help investment in energy related and sustainability. But that's not the only story in there that's worth looking at. Arizona poised to increase their energy efficiency requirements in the state, and a number of other stories like that. So there seems to be, I see a wind in the sails of the businesses who are trying to help people do a better job in their buildings.
Great, thank you. Hey, Therese. Let's move on to new ways of X. So who wants to start? New ways of work, play?
I could ask the question, was the first one on the McKinsey thing there, was the kind of how do you, if people are, there's this hybrid of people working at home or in the office or in different offices more remotely, how do you hold, brainstorming sessions, collaboration meetings, things like that going forward? Do you still pull everybody in, or do you try and do it remotely? Because it doesn't kind of allow itself to be as free thinking and as challenging if it's done remotely, because usually one person's just talking, everybody else has to be silent. You can't do that, in a brainstorming session. It's a lot more interactive. So people are really going to have to think about that. And I don't know whether other people got ideas on how you could do it, but that's probably as big a challenge of it as anything, is how do you get that interaction of people if it really does remain a hybrid situation of remote and office working.
Roger, I kind of spoke about this on Wednesday, I think, but one of the interesting things we found, so the way that we used to work pre-COVID was, we would do workshops, brainstorming sessions with our customers. And of course, in those days, when I had to travel to the customer, I would try and pack as much as possible out of those meetings, right? So we would set 2-day workshop meetings, fly in on the day afternoon before, fly in the evening, on the way out type of thing, and do a 2-day, try and pack as much in because of the cost of the travel and stuff. And I always thought they were successful but mediocre. I never thought I got the full 2 days value out of the session, but to your point, there was a lot of good free flow. What we found since is that we are able to break down those workshops into a lot more micro components, right? So we would take the workshop and say, okay, let's just take this one sentence and we'll do a 1-hour workshop on that. And we found a couple of things. One was, people are a lot more focused in an hour and to do brainstorming. Brainstorming over 2 days and workshopping over 2 days, it's very intense, right? I mean, it's takes a lot out of the people and stuff. So we broke it down into these micro workshops. We call them, 1 hour on one bullet point. There's a bit of diligence, like you said. Some people like me like to overtake these conversations and not let others speak. But we find we're finding a lot more productivity as a result, or a lot more output as a result, if we keep it highly distilled and focused.
Okay.
Just one thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if any of you guys have used mind mapping before for doing brainstorming sessions. We're finding that especially useful right now with people all over the place. You put it up on the screen and everybody can see, and even set it up so everyone can share. But it's kind of a good way to keep the creative juices and energy, more importantly, flowing on that kind of thing, as well as get it documented pretty well. But it gives you an opportunity to visualize it nicely and have a little debate or argument over, well, that one belongs over here and that one should group with that up there. And oh, there's 3 subcategories to that idea. So we find that very useful because that is one of the biggest things that we as a group have talked about, but I've also heard in other circles too, is the how do you brainstorm? How do you collaborate? How do you get that energy that you get in a room when you're all sitting in front of a whiteboard, for instance? So finding
I use Miro for that. Which product do you use, Tracy?
I'm using Simple Mind right now.
Okay.
But there's some free open source ones that I've used previously.
Yeah, Miro is out of Russia, I think, and it is really good for having it over the internet. Yeah, that's what I use.
Alper, it's interesting you bring up that one because that's what was on my mind too. I believe it's out of Amsterdam too, but yeah, it has some Russian technologists working on it. But there's so much startup energy in this idea of whiteboarding and tools to aid in that brainstorming process that both Tracy and Roger brought up, that people having more ideas and you can only speak one at a time. There's all sorts of startups that are, and Miro being one of Miro, kind of like the Barcelona artist, Miro, that I think it's spelled.
Do you have a link for that, Alper? Or?
Miro.
Yeah.
One thing that let me put it this way, for the last 20 years, I've been running my company out of home or home office for the reasons of finance. And we have improved that along with the COVID, since no one can come in. And always on meeting rooms has been really helpful. And for that, we are utilizing a gaming application called Discord. So all the employees come into one room, they can share their videos. And so any gaming technology out there, just like the one that I'm broadcasting my background screen, is super helpful for businesses. And it is really interesting that those technologies has not moved into the business space landscape yet. Although there are a bunch of posts on Discord website that they need to sell it and make it for business as well.
And then I know we brought it up in our pre-conversation, but the different personality types, because I appreciate everything Alper's saying. And I have right now, because of COVID, living with my son and living with my husband, who can go deep on all these topics, especially they're engineering mindsets. And I find myself it's not the same thing. It's not how a sales marketing person would think about it. But a gamer, like Alper said, my son, he can be so excited about Notion as another one, about note taking and how it helps the Scrum Master. And I get it, but I don't think it's ever gonna replace the face-to-face and the human contact. And sometimes maybe is it just a personality type thing. So
that's what I was going to sort of ask, is that clearly there's lots of innovations and that will continue. We've seen that in the last few months. I'm wondering how we as humans are adapting to it. both from a performance, which is obviously what the business wants, but also whether we're actually getting the sort of non-productive benefits out of it, as we would do when we do sort of face-to-face meetings. And I don't know, maybe we just get used to it and we just find those other things elsewhere.
You know, you said something that is what I was going to contribute here for new ways to think or work today. And it all revolves around the concept of innovation and what that means to anybody in particular, right? So often over the years in my business, I've often thought of innovation not as, you know, traditional technology innovation, even though we're a technology company, but rather how we innovate in our business model overall and think about projects and even look and evaluate which projects are interesting. And one of the things that's really happened during the pandemic, and I think you guys have heard me say this before, but we have several, what I've been labeling pandemic accelerated projects that were happening before the pandemic, but got new life and new priority because of the pandemic. And interestingly, when I look back now at these are all what I would call adjacent to traditional building control type projects and applications. They're applications that end up in buildings, but they're not HVAC, they're not lighting, you know, they're not kind of the traditional sorts of projects. So it's become kind of interesting. And now we've pipelined a few others on our software side that are the same thing. And I'm not sure that we would have had an opportunity to look at these if it weren't for the pandemic. You know, I think everybody's antenna went up, you know, when the pandemic started. I need to make sure I'm looking for all kinds of new business in whatever form it comes. But now in hindsight, we're thinking there's a bit of a diversification going on here that is really comfortable to us, and not just having all of our applications, all of our eggs in one basket here. So we're now kind of purposely thinking and looking at and going after these adjacent applications. So that's just something I wanted to add out there is, you know, open up your thinking about what business looks like, what projects are, you know, in your wheelhouse or not, because even though these are not traditional building controls projects, it's interesting how many of them use very similar, if not the exact same controllers and technologies. And, you know, if it's not this protocol, it's that protocol, but in the end, it's all IoT kind of stuff anyway, right? So
Tracy, question for you on that. How much of those new ideas is a result of a customer request versus an internal, wouldn't be neat if we did this, and then you go off and see if there's a market for it?
That is a really good point, because that's kind of where we are in our transition, right? All of these, for the most part, came to us through relationships or reputation from customers. But now we're trying to figure out, okay, actively, how do we go after this? It's changed how we've architected, like on the software side, how we've architected our software a bit and how we think about it, and given it new light in terms of what do we call what we do, right? And how do we give it a name and market it out there? When you start getting outside of, you know, we've got now this platform that addresses more than, you know, kind of just retail energy management, for instance. And how do we go after all these different vertical markets? It was real conundrum that we had for a while, but now we figured out, you know, we don't need to go after and worry so much about the market, worry about the problem that we're solving, because it turns out that same problem exists across all the verticals, right? And market around that part of it, as opposed to, hey, we're a solution for restaurants or convenience stores or something like that. So now our thinking is changing. How do we proactively go out and try to find these opportunities like this? So I don't have a lot of advice about what will work yet. Tune in, maybe 6 months, I don't know. We'll have an answer.
Jim Lee, you've spoken quite a lot about your sort of trying to sort of think about things as being physical world analytics. That always resonates. That's kind of interesting. That's kind of taking the analytic skills that you have in technology and just pointing it at a different target.
Absolutely, Anto. So if you look at what kinds of analysis you can perform in the world, I divide the world into two spheres. One that is traditional IT, where people are analyzing numbers and text and statistics, and the context for that analysis is the English language and the Financial Accounting Standards Board. You know, how numbers are represented financially is something that's been well understood for a long time. And how one uses the English language or any other language to communicate, that's well understood. And, you know, for the history of computing, that's what the world is focused on. But for the last 20 years or so, we've been focused on what I call physical world analytics, which is the ability to capture physical world data and the representations of that data, starting with BACnet standardization, moving on to Haystack. These kinds of things give that physical data meaning. But if we have analytics platforms that can analyze any physical thing, what's really the difference between a industrial and process control situation, or a railroad locomotive, or a hydroelectric dam? Any of these things, we have representations of physical data. So the question is how do you find a value proposition that you can bring to people? And what's really great about the buildings value proposition is dividing the world into two other quadrants now, or two other sections. One would be analytics, where there's a recurring problem that recurs over and over again. And the other is what we call the golden nugget or needle in a haystack analytics problem. So on the sales and marketing side of the world, and the traditional IT side, people have focused on needle in a haystack problems. How do I identify, you know, who's going to buy my automobile? They live in a house with a white picket fence and 2.2 children, etc. That's been beaten to death. But on the physical world side, we have the ability to look at these models and look at places where there's recurring value. And the buildings vertical is the most interesting because buildings are extremely poorly built, extremely poorly run, and the problems that we can analyze occur over and over again. And that results in a revenue stream that can continue to grow over time. Whereas if I discovered that you've got an obsolete chiller and you change it once, then you're done, right? So I think that those are how we see the value opportunities. And the only problem that you get into when you look at these physical world analytics value propositions is they have to be compelling enough. And they aren't always compelling enough. There's not always enough data sufficiency. Or sometimes it's just not as interesting as you would think.
I think to that aim, Jim, I think building control, building automation systems have kind of the same. I mean, fundamentally, they're not going to change much. You've got to collect some data somehow. Whether it's an edge or whether it's got a flatter network, whichever way it works, it's still going to be doing some similar things. And quite honestly, the BAS world has kind of been doing the IoT for ages. It's stopped on-prem. They just haven't shipped the stuff out to the cloud. And I think that's where the thing changes to the data. And when you look at the amount of money that's been invested, going back to Tracy's point, in the past 2-3 years in startups, it's all people looking at, okay, what can we do with this data? And I think the whole COVID situation has perhaps accelerated some of that with things like, hey, we can offer space management, we can do wayfinding, we can do visitor registration, we can do all these good things. And that's where a lot of the stuff is doing, is actually building out around the information that's actually being shipped out of site. And quite honestly, the stuff on site, there may be some changes, maybe the communications have changed a bit, but at the end of the day, it's just going to be the connectivity to get the information out. And it's probably going to be built around all those services, innovative services that perhaps will come out, the newer companies and the things that Tracy's talking about, and perhaps what we're all thinking about is, you know, how do you move forward and build a business beyond what we do today?
I think that the interesting problem there, Roger, is finding customers that are willing to change their own business process and move forward, because value reservoirs are aplenty out there. There are many, many opportunities. But finding industries or mechanisms where you can actually build a business out of it, that's a little more challenging, even with the based stuff.
I think some of the smarter REITs are beginning to get that now. They're recognizing they got to have those facilities and capabilities in their buildings before the customers, you know, the people are going to occupy it. And perhaps over the next year or so, as leases run out, they're going to have some of these capabilities in the, you know, to attract new occupants.
Right.
So do you guys, I'll jump in here on some new ways. And again, I concentrated really on the built space, is that the this whole COVID thing has really driven a paradigm change. And I look at it as we used to talk about performance and efficiency and things like that, that various technologies do to help manage and operate buildings. But today, that conversation has changed to wellness, risk mitigation, safety, crisis avoidance, and so forth and so on. And then to your point, both Jim, Roger, and Tracy, in and around data, it's all now about making use of new data sources. Getting the data, I think we can all agree that that's not a challenge anymore. We can get as much data as we really can use, but it's these newer data sources that is the newer way that we need to take a look at this. And what I mean by new data sources or newer is the procedural stuff like the PPE, the physical distancing and occupant tracking and those types of things. The cleaning and disinfection. We've talked about that and how important that is the, you know, how often and when was the last time the washroom was cleaned or the desk surfaces were cleaned or whatever the case is. And then obviously the whole change now in the mechanical side, especially with air distribution, relative humidity, so forth and so on. And I think at the root of this is that there's new ways to have conversations, and whether we are bringing those conversations to the marketplace or the marketplace is bringing those types of conversations to us for us to answer, to have discussions on, such as how do, you know, and I wrote these down because these are three that occurred in real life for me over the last week and a half, over a week and a half ago. How can we leverage our existing solutions and services to increase the protection of our building occupants? In other words, they don't sit here, want to have to rip and replace, bring all this other stuff. How can we use what we have today? How can we reduce facility operating costs during times of decreased occupancy? And then finally, how can we use building technologies to help mitigate the risk that I'm facing? So I think those are the new ways that we, at least what I'm seeing in our space.
Great, thanks. John, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I guess, you know, as we talk to people out there, I think one of the things we see that slows down adoption and continues to surprise me is that the difficulty of organizations getting to their data. And the fact that they don't realize it ahead of time makes us the bearer of bad news, right? You know, hey, I want to analyze all my meters. Okay, how am I going to connect them? Well, I don't know. I thought you knew. Well, what brand are they? What protocol are they? Where are they located? Are they connected to a network? And all of a sudden, it's like, geez, I wish I never met you, John. You know, but they think so many organizations think they have data because they do, but it's locked up, and they really haven't thought through what are the steps involved. I would consider it one of the major friction points in moving to, data-driven facilities and getting a lot of these benefits, because actually, if you can get it, the processes to normalize it, there's work involved, but that's so much that's being automated. And the rules you apply, there's always new rules to write and deeper things you can look for and doing, and rules and algorithms related to specific applications and stuff. But if you can get a hold of the data, you can start showing financial value quicker. And I think that's what, is needed to help people really start adopting, right? This is painful when I got to go through all of this complexity. I don't know I'm going to get a value out of it, right? I see that continue to come up with people that even what I would consider pretty sophisticated organizations haven't thought through, unrelated to, what I'm selling. They haven't thought through, do I have an ability to access the data I think I have? They don't need to hire me to answer that question, but oftentimes it's only when we're having a discussion that they start thinking that through.
So a new way to organize and find data.
Yeah, I don't know if I can describe how we'd wrap that up in a simple comment, other than, organizations thinking more about their data. And if anybody says, oh yeah, we got that data, you can't stop there. You have to say, okay, how can it be acquired by another software application?
Yeah. So John, there's, a lot of the emphasis has been for the past, as on modeling the data in a consistent fashion, i.e. Haystack. But the mechanism, there hasn't been any push that I'm aware of to where a building can set up their systems in such a way that they can be accessed. So from a networking perspective, from a maybe even some sort of a data lake or storage vehicle that has all the data consolidated so people can just reach in. There's no standard mechanism. Every building has a different solution.
Absolutely.
And most don't have any solution.
Right. And organizations have different ways that they look at it. Right?
Yeah.
We I can remember being involved with some customers, and they were going down the data lake. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out with our IT department how to bring all the data together in a data lake.
Right.
And a couple of years down the road, it was like, they have even seen the futility in that, right?
Yeah.
What you want is to be able to get the data you need for the application you need. And the idea that you're going to put in front of it a requirement to get all the data in one place ahead of time, as if you knew what all the data was and what you wanted to do with it. It's kind of like, using data and analytics is not building a bridge. We don't know how wide the river is and exactly what type of bridge, right?
Yeah.
It's more like we need boats to get across there and find out what's over there.
Right.
And John, they build a factory that is pushing out dirty data to the lake, and the lake becomes dirty. It costs a lot more to clean it up.
Yeah, Jim's got a call.
I was going to say exactly to the point, John. We've had a lot of customers go down the data lake strategy, and it's almost always a disaster because they've destroyed the data by not premeditated, without having a premeditated idea of what they were going to do with it. So they often didn't collect it with the right sampling frequency or the right metadata around it. And once again, if you get back to this other, business finance side where the context of the English language and accounting is understood by everybody, you don't have that problem to the extent that you have with physical world analytics, where you need to have an understanding of the physics that you're going to analyze. And if you don't have that, chances are you collected the data wrong. And without having deep domain expertise in what that is, chances are that the data lake is going to be a garbage proposition.
Yeah. But Jim, if there was a consistent methodology where you could subscribe to data, a mechanism for subscription, and the owner, all they had to do is say, okay, I got a building automation system, these points you could subscribe to. And then you had a consistent way to connect to that data from a networking perspective so that you were a trusted participant. Then you decide, what to do with the points you subscribe to, but it's all being done in that subscription method would work for any kind of control system. So if everybody, developed a standard method for subscribing, And then the security piece would be around access and willingness for that information to leave the building.
Yeah, I think that it's a great idea, Steve, and some of the large IT companies are trying to
Mhm.
do that right now.
Yep.
The problem you get into is it's hard to premeditate what you're going to want to do with that data, to collect it.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
That's
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah, the challenge. But the fact is, like John said, you can't even get to that part of the conversation because you can't get to the data because the owner doesn't even know what he has, let alone has given you a mechanism by which you can discover it and decide whether there's any value in it.
You could also posit that if they got enough, that they could get to good enough. They might not get to all interesting value propositions, but
Right.
maybe they can get to good enough.
Yeah, exactly.
I had an interesting conversation with an end user just late last week, who we had this whole conversation about getting the data and getting access to it and all that. And it was, the fun part was, and harking back to last week's discussion, they actually sat around for 10 minutes wondering about whether they actually owned that data or whether the incumbent controls guy actually, and I was sitting there listening to them having this internal conversation. I'm like trying to help them and counsel them. And these were serious facility folk who, like an IT guy who like, do we own this stuff? Can we actually send it out? Is this okay?
I think part of one of the things we're wrestling with is how do we make business out of all of this? But I think the fact that we've identified some of these issues and can recognize these issues is the opportunity in itself, right? That we are the people who can guide customers through this transition. Of course, the problem is change takes time, frustratingly long sometimes, but
combining that to what you said earlier about pivoting and finding other opportunities, if we can, we know how to control and do automation and we know how to gather data, but if we can sort of figure out what to do with it and turn it into value, that itself can be positioned to create value.
That's my point.
One point that I want to make is not all data is equal. There is string data, text data, there's time series data. And every time that I get into these is that I'm going to dump all my data to SQL. And then they try to retrieve that data. It takes 15 minutes to query the time series data. So there are databases, technologies for time series oriented. There are databases for text-based. There are databases just for use for our statistics, databases for, so not all data is equal and not all data should be stored and queried the same way. Yeah. So just dumping a data lake, not all the data lakes are same. They should be different data lakes. And that it's a big problem from the beginning.
You'd be swamped with CCTV data.
Right. Yeah, not all data is equivalent in size, in magnitude. CCTV being a good example of a lot of data. Jim Butler, Therese, you've not sort of chimed in on new ways to something?
You want to go first, Therese?
I thought I chimed. I thought I over chimed already.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess it's my turn then. I keep thinking about what is going to persist beyond this extraordinary period that we're in right now. And I keep going back to the idea that, we have become much more sensitive to this idea that infectious diseases can be really dangerous. And if we only knew who was sick, maybe we could go back to the office safely without wearing masks, which I'm already tiring of. I don't know about the rest of you. So I keep thinking about how we might have screening technologies like these simple temperature measuring things that we sometimes see that can give us confidence before we go back to the office that we're not going to, infect all of our coworkers. And there are obviously privacy concerns with these. But one thing that I saw that this morning that was really interesting was a group of researchers who had developed a an AI assisted system that could tell from a forced cough with high likelihood whether you had coronavirus or not. And these sorts of technologies, I think, have great potential. Whether people will feel comfortable using them on a wide scale, I think, is an open question. But the alternative is look at Japan, in which we're all wearing masks, whenever we think we have any kind of a sniffle or something. And I'm not sure that at least we in the United States are ready for that, in which we're wearing masks all winter, because we're not sure whether we're sick or whether someone else that's packed right next to us on the subway is sick. So maybe there are technology opportunities for self-assessment so that people can figure out whether they should be going back to the office and whether they should be wearing a mask. And so I'm very interested in the sort of post-pandemic, what's going to stick in terms of habits and what technology opportunities there are to help keep the sick people at home and let the people who are not be sick go about their business, whether it's going to school or going to work or whatever it might be.
Sort of along those lines is the slide that I put up, the new way to travel, and that was triggered by, I saw this article about hubs and questioning whether hubs is really airline hubs. I mean, the future of travel, because they've obviously been gaining popularity for the last 20 years. I, for one, have lived always near a hub, London, Dallas, San Francisco, and that's always been a sort of a feature of me living there. Now I don't. But there's also new types of transportation. Obviously, the Airbus 380 is kind of history as a big airport. So maybe there's kind of a different way that people will actually travel out of after all of this. That will sort of just change the dynamics of traveling, so that hub type travel is not the best way of getting to places. So it's very sort of big, and I'm not even sure it's ambitious, but that's kind of what I was looking at.
You mean like Star Trek's transporter, right? Beam me up, Scotty.
I don't think it needs to be that kind of revolutionary. I think I've been watching a lot of the aircraft, sort of the new types of aircraft being designed, the supersonic boom thing and the Calera, which is the small aircraft. And obviously a lot of the sort of self-driving cars and eventually self-driving airplanes. That will change something in the next 10 years or so.
But to get away from the hub, you're going to need kind of open skies type approach where anybody can fly to anywhere. Because the carbon footprint of hubs is not good.
Yeah, exactly. You're putting all of the airplanes actually on top of each other is what happens with hubs. And FAA is implementing this sort of point-to-point navigation that a lot of airplanes now do. It's the most efficient. So
one of the things that we talked about before, which I think is important to talk about when new, is new ways to sell. And in some of the previous conversations we've talked about how wonderful it is that we don't need to travel and we can quickly arrange Zoom calls. And although it's not perfect, it's good enough. And I was just having a personal think about that and thinking about how I miss all the visual cues that I get when I visit a customer. Is it going to be a good analytics customer? Well, if I just walking through their facility, walking through a mechanical room, if I can eat off the floor, I know that it probably is a well-run organization. And if it's filthy, it probably isn't. And all of those cues do not come through the web conference. And I'm wondering what the associated panel thinks about, A, there's the human reaction, and B, there's just the intelligence of being there that I miss. How do we get around that?
I've been thinking about that a lot too, Jim, actually, because it is different and it's tricky. And I think when we were talking about this the other day, I had made the comment about some of my other skills that are now heightening because I don't have that opportunity to go see a location. It's much like somebody who is blind or deaf or whatever, the other senses pick up and make up the difference. And I see some of that going on already, you know, reading people's faces on Zoom meetings or behind masks. Or the one I was complaining about the other day was I didn't realize how much I relied on seeing people's mouths to listen to them, right? Until I couldn't anymore, you know? So I've been kind of thinking about what are some of the selling skills or cues or body language or whatever that could help with that. And I suspect we're going to figure some of that out with some time, like we have a lot of other things, but other things have to heighten for sure.
I think one of the examples we were talking about on Wednesday that I noticed in a Zoom meeting. So typically when we do a sales presentation in a Zoom meeting, I might have a couple of my colleagues on the call as well. And, you know, I'm the guy who likes to talk, so I'll do all the talking. One of the things I've noticed is that my colleagues are doing a lot more because they're forced to, right? They're forced to watch the audience, the people I'm presenting to, a lot closer than when we used to do it in person. You know, in person, they'd be kind of watching the presentation more than they'd be watching the people. And one of the things I noticed is my colleagues coming back to me, telling me that, well, so-and-so and so-and-so was doing a lot of nodding, you know, saying yes and getting a lot of hits. And so-and-so was just turned off and doing email, you know, he was just off in the weeds somewhere. So I noticed that we're getting a lot more visual feedbacks, facial feedbacks from my colleagues who are watching the Zoom thing as I present or they present or something like that, which is kind of interesting. And I know schools are using, there's some software now, right, where schools can determine whether the kids are alert or attentive, or, you know, it's an add-on capability. I'd like to see some of those tools in the Zoom presentations I do. So if it's just me, can Zoom watch my audience to get are they positive, are they negative, or are they neutral, you know, in the response? And it'd be great to even line that up with which slides in the deck that I was presenting at that time, right? If I'm at slide 10, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback. I'm going, okay, that really resonated with these guys, right? And if, you know, slide 6 is turned off.
So you can record it, which obviously is great because you can then look back on it. And also the other
line it up.
I've always been sort of intrigued with the Zoom experiences. I'm sitting here talking and there are 11 faces staring straight at me. You don't get that in a physical. Right. You might get the guy across the table to stare at you on either side, but everybody else is not.
But a human brain catches a nuisance or a response 1/1000th of a second and makes its mind up behind, and those cues are lost within this. If COVID was here 10 years ago while I was chasing John Petsy at trade shows, I don't think I would be here today. So this virus has to end, and for us to survive in the future.
I think it's just different, Alper. It's I mean, I'm catching nuances out of all of your faces, right? That I would never catch if we were meeting.
I think the precision is lost, and I'll set my case here.
I've got one for Anno. Anno.
Yeah,
no,
see?
just kidding. Just kidding.
And then I have the ability to mute or cut my.
That's right. That's right.
You know, GoToWebinar has a feature in it that tells you whether somebody's being attentive.
Yeah.
And basically it's, you know, if they're clicked off the GoToMeeting app and off, you know, browsing or doing something else, it lights up. So I think we're going to see more and more tools and features like that built into even like Zoom or any of these like this.
And on the topic of conferences, like if you happen to have the event person for IFMA and the event person from BOMA and the event person for a big real estate company on the same stage, and they're all talking about the future of where conferences are going, I think that what they'd be saying is that what they could get with Reach and by changing the economics of how much a ticket costs to go to that conference, that, you know, there's a continuum. The hybrid's not going to go away because what you miss in, you know, bringing certain qualified, willing to pay for a high ticket item and days in a airport tickets and days in a hotel versus for a cheaper ticket, you can reach so many more people. I think that that's a real trade-off to make. And I don't think for that reason, the hybrid conference is ever going to go away.
I would love to not be executive platinum on American and be able to stay at any Hilton or Hyatt for free for the next 3 weeks because I have so many travel points. For sure. I'm with you on that, Therese. Completely.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, it's changed the events business. And I think that we have to look at how we change to move along with that. And you know, the messages that reach people in Singapore or, you know, other places. Whoops, there's my phone.
I know we're running out of time. I just had one note, since most of the people on this call are in software development in one respect or another. You know, we've been running a virtual business and virtual development from the get-go with resources all over the globe, frankly. And what COVID has emphasized for an efficiency standpoint is the importance, you know, and I think pretty much everybody has Agile as some version of Agile that they're following. The importance of the program owner or program manager or product manager, whatever title you want to, but that strong definition there, putting the extra effort into, because everybody downstream from that definition is affected. So we already break up design versus development, and the designer is going to design screens that he or she thinks reflect what the requirement is. So getting that, putting that extra effort into the requirements is really key to the rest of the process. So that's my 2 cents I want to get in.
I think that's a great point, and it's a great point to end this call today. I think we've had some really interesting discussions. Thank you all, and thanks for all the attendees. And with that, wrap this up. Video is going to be up tomorrow morning. Otherwise, we'll come back next week for Monday Live. Subject TBD, but we'll figure it out by the end of this week. So have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
See y'all.
Bye.